Imagine waking up one morning and learning that the center of the world's money is no longer in New York. Imagine hearing that Wall Street is still standing, the skyscrapers are still there, the logos still glow, the trading floors still look busy. But the money itself, the real money, the invisible rivers of capital that decide who has power and who does not, are no longer flowing through America. They are flowing north, quietly, silently, through underground cables, through fiber optic lines, through server rooms that most people will never see, and they are flowing into one place, Toronto. Not Beijing, not Moscow, not Dubai, not Singapore, Canada. And behind this shift stands one man, not a general, not a billionaire, not a tech CEO, a former central banker, a man who once ran the Bank of Canada, a man who once ran the Bank of England, a man who understands the plumbing of global finance better than almost anyone alive. Mark Carney. Donald Trump believed he could bend global finance to his will. He believed he could tax the world's money. He believed Wall Street had no choice but to obey. He believed America owned the system. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Because Wall Street just made a decision, a historic decision, a silent decision. They flipped a switch. And when they did, the United States lost control of global finance. This did not happen with tanks. This did not happen with missiles. This did not happen with explosions. It happened with code. It happened with legal filings. It happened with algorithms. It happened while most Americans were watching something else. And by the time anyone noticed, it was already over. To understand what just happened, we have to start with something that sounds small, a 2% tax, that is all. 2%. On paper, it sounds harmless, almost boring. Trump called it a capital access tax. He said it would make foreign investors pay their fair share. He said it would punish countries that rip off America. He said it would raise revenue. He said it would show strength. But Wall Street does not think like politicians. Wall Street does not think in slogans. Wall Street thinks in basis points, tiny fractions of a percent. The entire global financial system is designed to move money with almost zero friction, speed, certainty, predictability. That is the Holy Trinity. You disturb any one of those and the system starts searching for an exit. Trump introduced friction, massive friction, because a 2% tax on capital flows is not small. It is enormous. It turns New York into the most expensive clearing center on earth overnight. It means every pension fund in Europe, every sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East, every hedge fund in Asia, every multinational corporation moving money across borders now has to pay a toll to use American pipes. For decades, those pipes were free. That is why the world used them. Trump turned them into a toll road. And money hates toll roads. The reaction inside major financial institutions was immediate. Not public, not loud, internal. Emergency risk meetings, stress models, scenario simulations. What happens if we stay? What happens if we move? How fast can we move? What is the worst-case scenario? All those models pointed to the same conclusion. Staying inside Trump's system was now a catastrophic risk, not just expensive, dangerous, because the tax itself was not the biggest problem. The biggest problem was unpredictability. If Trump can impose a 2% tax today, what stops him from imposing 5% tomorrow? 10% next year, freezing accounts, blocking transactions, targeting specific countries, targeting specific companies, using financial plumbing as a weapon. Once that door is open, no contract is safe, no rule is permanent, no assumption holds. That is when the call went out. Not to Washington, not to Congress, not to regulators, to Mark Carney. Because Carney is not just Canada's Prime Minister. He is one of the architects of the post-2008 global financial order. When the world nearly collapsed in 2008, Carney was inside the room helping rebuild the system. He knows where every pipe runs. He knows where the choke points are. He knows how to create alternatives. The banks did not ask him for speeches. They did not ask him for political cover. They asked for something simple, a safe place, a sanctuary, a jurisdiction where capital could move freely. No transaction taxes, No political interference, no surprise executive orders, no late-night social media policy shifts. Carney already had a plan, because he had been watching Trump for years. He watched tariffs appear overnight, trade agreements torn up, allies threatened, markets whipped back and forth. Carney understood something before most leaders did. Trump was not just disruptive. He was a systemic risk, so Canada quietly prepared. Emergency legislation, sovereign clearing status for Toronto, legal walls that American executive orders cannot cross, permanent tax exemption for foreign capital merely passing through Canada, unlimited liquidity backstop from the Bank of Canada. In simple terms, Carney built a parallel financial universe, a mirror of Wall Street, without the chaos. Trump built a toll booth. Carney built a highway. And when Trump's 2% tax went live, the banks did not argue. They did not negotiate. They executed, server by server, system by system. Trade routing tables updated. Clearing instructions changed. Settlement engines redirected. The money did not stop moving. It simply changed direction, north, from Manhattan to Toronto. Most Americans did not notice, because nothing exploded. ATMs still worked. Stock tickers still moved, banking apps still opened. But behind the scenes, the heart of American financial power skipped a beat, then another, then another. This was not symbolic. This was structural. And it happened faster than anyone expected. Inside Wall Street, traders saw transaction latency maps lighting up. Data traffic flowing into Canada spiked. Clearing confirmations returned stamped under Canadian jurisdiction. That is when panic started, because everyone understood the implications. For decades, America's power has not come mainly from its military. It has come from controlling the plumbing of global finance. Sanctions work because money flows through American systems. Asset freezes work because money touches American jurisdiction. Pressure campaigns work because banks must comply with American rules. But when the money no longer flows through American pipes, those tools weaken. Fast. Trump did not just tax capital. He told the world not to rely on America, and the world listened. Within minutes of major bank filings, U.S. Treasury yields jumped. Investors demanded higher interest to lend America money. The dollar weakened. Confidence dropped. Canadian bank stocks surged. Toronto's market hit record highs. The Canadian dollar strengthened. Markets were delivering a verdict in real time. Capital had chosen its new home, and Trump had no idea what he unleashed. He thought he was squeezing Wall Street. He thought he was forcing loyalty. Instead, he forced an escape. The most dangerous part for America is this. Once financial infrastructure moves, it almost never comes back. Factories can return. Jobs can be reshored. But clearing systems, settlement networks, legal frameworks, and trust take decades to build and seconds to lose. Carney did not need to attack Trump. He did not need to insult America. He did not need to give speeches. He simply offered something Trump could not. Stability. And in finance, stability is everything. By the time Trump realized something was wrong, the flows were already gone. The switches were already flipped. The new normal was already established. America did not lose a trade fight. America did not lose a negotiation. America lost control of the engine that makes global power possible, and this was only the beginning. Because once money moves, everything else follows. Now, the real shock begins. Because what looked like a policy mistake was actually something much bigger. The 2% capital tax was only the trigger. The real event was the migration. And migrations of capital do not happen unless the risk is existential. Inside the biggest banks in America, something unusual happened 3 weeks before the tax officially went live. A confidential memo began circulating among top executives. Its internal title was simple but chilling: Jurisdictional Risk and Capital Flight Contingency. It did not read like politics. It did not mention ideology. It read like a survival manual. The memo classified the United States Treasury under what bankers call a Tier 1 unpredictability environment. That classification is normally used for unstable regimes where executive authority can override financial norms overnight. the same risk bucket used for fragile economies. For the first time in modern history, the American government was being treated as a systemic risk to its own financial infrastructure. The language in the memo was precise and cold. It warned that maintaining primary global settlement infrastructure inside a politically volatile environment posed unacceptable fiduciary exposure. In simple words, the banks were saying this: "We cannot guarantee our survival if we stay here." That sentence alone explains everything that followed. Because banks do not move trillions of dollars for politics. They move it for survival. And when survival becomes uncertain, they do not hesitate. They act. At the same time, this memo circulated quietly inside Manhattan offices. Something equally important was happening north of the border. In Ottawa, Mark Carney and a small circle of legal and financial architects finalized what insiders later called the Bay Street Framework. This was not a normal banking reform. This was a fortress blueprint. It granted Toronto sovereign clearing protections. It permanently exempted non-domestic capital flows from transaction taxation. It created legal firewalls preventing foreign executive interference. It guaranteed liquidity support from the Bank of Canada during any volatility spike. In short, it made Toronto the safest financial corridor on the planet. While Trump was celebrating his America First tax, Carney was building the escape tunnel. And when the banks ran their models comparing New York versus Toronto under the new reality, the math was brutal. Staying in New York meant absorbing hundreds of billions in friction costs over the next decade. Moving to Toronto meant near zero friction and regulatory stability. There was no debate. The numbers decided. Within hours of the official tax announcement, coordinated regulatory filings were submitted. Not dramatic, not loud, but synchronized. That coordination revealed something critical. This was not one bank acting alone. This was systemic. J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs. When the largest clearing institutions move together, the system itself shifts. Traders noticed first. Treasury yields spiked 18 basis points within minutes. That is not normal volatility. That is structural repricing. The dollar index fell sharply. Currency traders interpreted the move instantly. Confidence premium was evaporating. Meanwhile, in Canada, bank stocks surged more than 6% in a single session. The Toronto Stock Exchange hit record territory. The Canadian dollar strengthened in real time. Markets do not speak emotionally. They speak in price signals, and the signal was clear. A new epicenter was forming. Inside the Federal Reserve, alarm bells rang. Reports later suggested an emergency secure call was placed to the White House. The message was direct. The capital tax had triggered what economists call structural unanchoring. That phrase sounds technical, but it means something simple. The foundation is shifting. The Fed understood what the White House did not. American power depends on controlling the financial plumbing. Sanctions work because transactions clear through U.S. systems. Asset freezes work because assets touch U.S. jurisdiction. Every geopolitical leverage move relies on financial centrality. By introducing friction into the system, Trump weakened that centrality. Carney did not need to fight. He simply offered an alternative, and capital, like water, flowed downhill toward safety. The most shocking part was how quiet the shift was. No sirens, no headlines announcing collapse. Technicians inside data centers adjusted routing tables. Algorithms recalibrated clearing paths. Confirmation codes began originating from Toronto servers instead of Manhattan nodes. To the average citizen, nothing changed. But to the architects of global finance, everything changed. The control room had moved. And once that control room moves, leverage follows. Imagine sanctions enforcement when transactions no longer require American jurisdiction. Imagine future crises where Washington cannot freeze flows because the flows bypass it entirely. That is not theoretical. That is structural reality once clearing migrates. Wall Street executives later confirmed privately that the decision was purely actuarial. They were not making a statement. They were not protesting Trump. They were calculating risk exposure. The exposure was unacceptable. The move was inevitable. Money does not follow ego. Money follows predictability, and predictability had left Washington. Carney's advantage was psychological as much as legal. He did not shout. He did not posture. He did not escalate rhetoric. He provided certainty. In finance, certainty is oxygen. Remove it and systems suffocate. Provide it and systems migrate toward it. Trump believed Wall Street was captive. He believed geography trapped capital inside American borders. But capital is not steel or concrete. It is digital. It moves at light speed. It obeys math. Trump built friction. Carney removed friction. The outcome was predetermined. As the second trading day closed after the shift, the pattern solidified. Cross-border clearing volumes through Toronto remained elevated. Treasury markets showed persistent stress. Analysts on financial television began speaking in coded language about diversification of settlement risk. That phrase means decentralization away from the United States. For decades, the world accepted American dominance because it came with stability. Now stability had competition, and that competition was 30 miles north of Manhattan's skyline. The deeper implication is psychological. Once global investors realize there is a viable alternative to American financial dominance, the monopoly ends. Even if flows partially return in the future, the aura of inevitability is broken. The dollar's dominance depends as much on belief as mechanics. When belief fractures, even slightly, the long-term trajectory shifts. This was not a protest. This was a recalibration of global risk architecture, and it was engineered not with noise, but with preparation. Carney anticipated the shock before it arrived. Trump reacted after the damage began. That difference in timing is everything. One side weaponized unpredictability, the other weaponized preparation. The result is visible in bond spreads, currency charts, and clearing confirmations. And this is only phase 2. Because once financial control weakens, geopolitical consequences follow. Power is never abstract. It rests on systems. And when the system's control node relocates, influence relocates with it. The question is no longer whether the shift occurred. It did. The question is how deep the consequences will run. Because when global capital redraws its map, the world order quietly, where the real consequences become unavoidable. Because moving the plumbing of global finance is not just a technical adjustment, it is a transfer of power. And power transfers always reshape geopolitics. Once clearing and settlement infrastructure migrates, the tools nations use to influence each other change. The United States built much of its post-war dominance on an invisible advantage. Not just military strength, not just economic size, but financial centrality. Every major sanction regime, every asset freeze, every pressure campaign depended on one assumption. At some point, the money touches American systems. When that assumption weakens, enforcement weakens. That reality is now sinking in across foreign ministries and central banks worldwide. Quietly, methodically, contingency plans are being updated. Not to abandon the United States overnight, but to reduce dependency. And reduction of dependency is how empires fade. It does not happen with collapse. It happens with redundancy, step by step. Alternative clearing hubs, alternative settlement currencies, alternative liquidity backstops. Toronto is now one of those hubs. That fact alone permanently changes the map. Washington still has enormous influence, but it no longer has exclusivity. Exclusivity is what creates obedience. Competition creates choice, and choice erodes leverage. Inside multinational corporations, treasury departments are already adjusting. Cash management strategies are being diversified. Hedging models are incorporating jurisdictional risk in ways they never had to before. Boardrooms are asking new questions. Where is our exposure if U.S. policy shifts overnight? Where can we route flows if Washington imposes sudden restrictions? Those questions did not exist at scale 5 years ago. They exist now. That is the real legacy of the 2% tax. Not the revenue, not the politics, the psychological break. Once global finance internalizes that American policy can change abruptly, permanently, without institutional constraint, then permanent hedging becomes rational. And permanent hedging means permanent dilution of dominance. Carney understood this dynamic better than anyone because he lived through the 2008 crisis. He watched what happens when trust evaporates. He watched capital flee unpredictability and concentrate around stability. He also understood that you do not need to confront an empire head-on to weaken it. You offer a better system next to it. Empires rot when alternatives outperform. That is exactly what Toronto now represents. Not an anti-American project, not a hostile project, a stability project. Stability attracts capital more reliably than ideology ever could. Trump's worldview is transactional. He believes pressure produces obedience, in trade, in diplomacy, in finance. But pressure in complex systems produces adaptation. Adaptation produces workarounds. Workarounds produce independence. And independence is the enemy of coercion. By trying to extract tolls from global capital, Trump accidentally taught global capital how to avoid him. That lesson will not be unlearned, even if the tax is repealed tomorrow, even if future administrations reverse course. The map has already been updated in the minds of decision-makers. Canada demonstrated that an advanced economy with strong institutions can host world-scale financial infrastructure outside the United States. That proof of concept is priceless. Others will follow, not immediately, but incrementally. Singapore, Frankfurt, Zurich, Tokyo. Each already has pieces of the puzzle. Toronto just proved the final step is possible. That shifts bargaining power globally. Future negotiations with Washington will be different. Threats will carry less weight. Sanctions will require coalition support rather than unilateral enforcement. Financial warfare becomes harder when the battlefield is multipolar. That does not mean America collapses. It means America becomes one power among several instead of the singular hub. For Americans, the domestic consequences will arrive quietly. Higher borrowing costs. Because when demand for U.S. Treasuries weakens even slightly, yields rise. Higher yields mean higher mortgage rates, higher credit card rates, higher costs for government debt servicing, less fiscal room for social programs, more pressure on budgets. None of this will be attributed directly to Toronto in headlines, but it will be part of the causal chain. Power erosion rarely announces itself. It expresses itself through friction, through inefficiency, through higher costs everywhere. For Canada, the consequences are complex. Hosting global clearing infrastructure brings prestige and influence. It also brings responsibility and risk. Ottawa will face pressure from multiple sides. The United States will push quietly for alignment. Other countries will push for neutrality. Carney's challenge will be to maintain the perception of absolute stability, no politicization, no sudden rule changes, no favoritism. The moment Toronto looks like a political instrument rather than a neutral platform, capital will look elsewhere. Carney understands this. That is why his approach has been legalistic, technocratic, and boring. Boring is powerful in finance. Boring equals safe. The deeper lesson in all of this is not about Trump or Carney as individuals. It is about systems versus personalities. Trump governs through spectacle. Carney governs through architecture. Spectacle generates headlines. Architecture generates outcomes. The world runs on architecture. Pipes, wires, protocols, laws, clearing systems, settlement frameworks. Whoever controls the boring stuff controls reality. This is why the shift matters more than any speech, rally, or tweet. It happened in server rooms, in legal texts, in regulatory filings. That is where history actually moves. So when people ask how an empire declines, this is the answer. Not with collapse, not with invasion, with incremental loss of centrality, with the slow appearance of alternatives, with the quiet decision by thousands of risk managers to stop assuming one country is the only safe place. The United States is still immensely powerful, but it is no longer singular. That is the change. And singularity is what sustained the American era. The moment singularity ends, the era begins to fade. Not overnight, not dramatically, but irreversibly. Trump did not set out to weaken American financial dominance. He believed he was strengthening it. Carney did not set out to challenge American power publicly. He simply created a safer system. And in complex systems, safer beats louder every time. What we are witnessing is not a collapse. It is a rebalancing, a redistribution of gravity. And gravity always pulls toward stability. The center of global finance just became heavier north of the border. The world adjusted, quietly, permanently.